Many cookie recipes call for the baking trays to be lined with parchment or grease-proof paper. Some recipes recommend silica mats, whilst others would tell you to just bake directly onto the tray. But does this really matter? And if it does, which one should you use? The short answer is yes, it does matter. A lot. From my experiment, parchment is probably your safest bet, but other linings like the silica mat also have their place in baking cookies. I've set up a little experiment to find out more. For this, I'm going to use my chocolate chip cookie recipe as a baseline, which is pretty standard as far as cookie recipes go. I'm going to bake the cookie dough on 6 different surfaces just so we get a full picture. We have baking directly on the baking tray, both greased with butter and without, on aluminium foil, on parchment paper, both smooth and rough, and of course the also popular silicone mat. I'm going to follow the recipe exactly and bake them for 16 minutes for all surfaces to get a fair comparison. I won't bore you with how the cookies are made, you can check out my recipe video if you're interested. Let's just get to the results. Straight away we can see that baking the cookies directly on the tray greased with butter is no good. Unlike the parchment, and to a lesser extent the silicone mat as well, there is nowhere for the butter to go. The baking tray doesn't absorb any of the excess fats, and the cookie ends up being fried in the oven, which burns the edges of the cookie. You can see here how dark and overcooked it is. Same baking tray without a coating of butter actually turned out okay. The edges are not as burnt and has good height and volume as well. But you can see that it isn't perfect. The colour of the cookie, and especially around the edges, is not even all the way across. I suspect this is due to the same issue as before, where the excess fat and butter has nowhere to go. Onto the foil. I'm actually surprised this worked at all, because foil isn't all that non-stick. I had a hard time removing the cookie from the foil, and a small bit of chocolate actually ripped off. Aside from that though, the results were surprisingly good. It didn't overspread, and the cookie had a good shape. It's not perfect by any means, but it'll do if you're in a pinch. Moving on, the smooth parchment paper is by far the most commonly used in cookie recipes, and we can see why here. It has the ability to absorb the excess fat and allow the cookie to breathe as it cooks. The standard smooth parchment paper resulted in a cookie that is cooked evenly all the way across, as you can see here by the colour. It also did not overspread the cookie, giving it a good height and volume. Using the rough parchment paper didn't actually affect the results all that much. The cookies are a little bit thicker and spread it out a little bit less in the oven. This makes sense because the bumps in the parchment paper makes it harder for the cookie to spread out as it cooks. But I have to say, both types of parchment paper made very good cookies. Of course, the downside to having the rough paper is that it's very expensive compared to the smooth stuff. Some people will reuse parchment as well by wiping down the grease, but it's certainly not as durable as the silicone mats. So what does this all mean? The most obvious takeaway is that you should try and avoid baking cookies directly onto the tray or with foil if you can avoid it. It'll work in a pinch, but the results will not be the cookie your recipe is designed for. It won't be cooked evenly and may even stick to the surface. The line separating parchment paper and silicone mats is a little bit less clear. Both the rough and smooth parchment paper produce the most aesthetically pleasing cookies, with the most volume and least overspread. When comparing the cookie from the silicone mat side by side, you can really tell the difference. The paper allows the cookie to breathe and the hot air to penetrate the cookie evenly. These results explain why so many recipes recommend using parchment paper over any other kind of lining. However, if you already have a silicone mat, does this mean you should stop using it? Well, no. For most cookie recipes, I believe the results are close enough to parchment that you should continue using the silicone mat. The only exception is when the recipe is very specific or finicky. Macarons or thinner cookies, for example, are super sensitive to moisture, so you should follow the recipe exactly. Otherwise, don't retire your silicone mat just yet. Well, that was a really fun experiment and video to make. Let me know if you've had similar results in your baking down in the comments. And if you've enjoyed this video, you might also like this one, where I tested how the different levels of sugars affect different types of cakes. Thank you for watching, my name's been Isaac, and I'll see you in the next video.